Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We'll just give it a minute or two just to let people join. I can see the number shooting up very nicely. So we'll just give it a minute or so, and then we'll make a start. In the meantime, if you'd like to let us know what charity you're coming to us from and what your mission is in the chat, then that'll be perfect. Start a conversation. I think we will make a start. So afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is James, and I'm the Head of Marketing here at Charity Digital. I'll be your host and would like to give you a very warm welcome to today's session. So our session, How to Create Compelling Digital Journeys, is all about how to engage more effectively with your stakeholders, whether it means your donors, volunteers, staff, service users, or indeed anyone who finds you in the digital space. The session will be delivered by Helen, who is Managing Director of Seashell Collective, and the session will cover, amongst other things, how to improve a digital journey, how to ensure smooth and simple audience interaction on digital channels, and how to produce seamless journeys between digital channels. Now, just before handing over to Helen, I just wanted to share a few house rules and pointers for today's session. So the session is being recorded and will be uploaded to watch on demand within a week's time. The slides and other supporting resources will also be made available, so don't worry if you've missed anything. Closed captions are available for today's session. So to enable these, on the Zoom bar, the window along the bottom, click the up arrow button next to closed caption and then press show subtitles. During the webinar, please ask loads of questions in the Q&A section, which is also located on the Zoom menu bar along the bottom for Helen to address at the end of her presentation. If someone asks a question that resonates with you, you can upvote it. Just click on the thumbs up icon next to it, and this will upvote it automatically. Please do also feel free to share any other comments, experiences, or top tips in the chat section. Finally, if you encounter any sound or image issues, please let us know in the chat and we'll do our very best to address these as soon as possible and get the session back to normal as soon as we can. Without further ado, I'll pass over to Helen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. It's great to see the chat scrolling along and where everyone's from. So I know a little bit about you. So I'll start by telling you a little bit about me. So I did my postgraduate CIM marketing diploma back in 2004. And for the past 20 years, I've worked in the charity sector in fundraising and communications roles. My last in-house role was as UK Associate Director for Human Rights Watch for Development and Outreach. And for the past 5 years, I have been working as a freelancer in digital marketing, and creating compelling digital journeys is a real interest for me and something that I have been geeking out on for a long time. So I'm really excited to share some thoughts with you, hear what your experiences of creating digital journeys, and hopefully answer some questions. Before we get started on the content of the presentation, I wanted to ask you to just think about your own digital journey to get to this moment right now. So think about how you first heard about this session and what the process was that you went through to decide to actually sign up and to actually turn up here today. You will have had probably a core motivation that brought you here. So what I'd like you to do is just write down on a piece of paper or in the notes on your phone, what was your motivation for coming here? And try, if you can, to phrase it as a question. And then what I'd like to do at the end of the session is come back to that question or that motivation that you've written down and just think about whether it's been answered. And if it hasn't, then hopefully we can answer that at the end of the session. So the problem that is facing us is that marketing and creating journeys, particularly as the world has become digitized, has really changed. So back in the day, when I first started doing marketing, it was a bit like pouring people through a funnel. So I'll give you an example. I started off in events fundraising, and we used to do newspaper advertising to get people to sign up for events. Maybe you still do that if you work in that area, but it's not as common now. And so we would think about this traditional marketing funnel, which you probably are aware of, and this AIDA acronym for attention, interest, desire, and action. We'd think about design techniques to attract attention. We'd think about what the USPs and the benefits of the events and the features of the events were. And if people were interested enough to inquire, we'd send them an inquiry pack that helped to create desire and address any barriers they might be facing. And then they'd have the information to take action and sign up, which I have to tell you, was at that point a paper form that would arrive in the post. So things have obviously changed dramatically. And the problem that people like you working in marketing now face is that the funnel that used to be this beautiful, smooth thing now looks like a plate of spaghetti. And you are trying to sieve that plate of spaghetti, all those different digital channels and all those sort of things that you need to generate attention, interest, desire, and action through a sieve, and it is leaky. You are losing people left, right, and center because it's a really, really complex process now. So someone signing up for an event these days might see a social media post, and then they might search on Google to find out more about the event. They might read an article or a social media post about an article about your charity, and that might contribute to their decision making. They might sign up for your newsletter, and eventually they might take action on your website. But it's really hard to sort of follow that journey, and you don't necessarily know what is happening in the mind of your audience. And it's this sort of consideration phase, which is, I think, one of the biggest sort of issues that faces us when we're thinking about marketing in the digital world. So, and there's all sorts of things that you now have to contend with. So there are issues with misinformation. Whereas if I had placed an advert in a newspaper with the charity's brand on it, brands were very trusted 20 years ago. And there is increasingly, because of misinformation online, distrust of brands. There's also a very changed role for channels within this kind of spaghetti of digital journeys for influencers. So because audiences aren't necessarily trusting brands as much, they look for that personal connection, and they look for those individuals that they can trust, whether that's within a brand or whether it's an influencer who feels like they are kind of independent of brands and of other influencers and are therefore to be trusted. There's also the problem of AI. So you may have seen on Google now, if you search for something, you might get an AI summary. I think it's coming up about 70% of the time. And that AI summary is potentially drawing on ratings websites. It's drawing on your social media platforms. It's drawing on your blog to create that summary of information about your organization or about the thing within your organization that you're encouraging your audience to do. And there's also difficulty in getting PR cut through. Newspaper readerships have been falling, so actually they're a lot more kind of discerning about which stories they're going to place, because they need to know that it's going to attract readers. And we're also faced with what traditionally were very popular monthly email newsletters no longer connecting with audiences, because our inboxes are so crazy that we're also very discerning about what comes into our inboxes. And there's also lots of competition on your websites. You're doing so many different things, from fundraising to service provision to campaigning to volunteering, and all of those different journeys are competing on your website, and you're trying to get people to follow them from one homepage. And I think the thing that's great about the digital world is that we get lots of data. So we can really see where people are going, how long they're spending on those particular channels. Perhaps we might see how much they're clicking. We might see whether content is reaching more people. We might see how much people are actually opening our content, if it's email, all of this data. But what it doesn't really tell you about is this vital consideration stage, this sort of grey space where people are pinging between your different digital channels and deciding what relationship they want to have with you. So that's what we want to think about today. So that's the problem, which can feel complex and overwhelming as a marketer. Believe me, I know it's what I do day to day. But there are ways around this problem, and they are effective. So what we're going to think about is how can we work with internal stakeholders and market research methods like surveys and insight interviews to really help us understand who our audiences are and what is really happening for them in that sort of consideration stage. What is it that takes them from being aware of you or something that is part of your offering and getting them through to actually becoming involved with you in some way? So we're going to think firstly about internal stakeholders, because we can spend a lot of time, I think, particularly in the charity sector, within our own meeting rooms, virtual or not, thinking about what we already know. And that knowledge is really valuable. But what it doesn't tell us is what our audiences are actually thinking. So I think starting with a conversation with internal stakeholders who have lots of knowledge and may have lived experience of some of the issues that you're working on is really important. But the purpose of those conversations is to create a hypothesis. So it's understanding what you think you know about your audiences. So having a conversation with internal stakeholders about who your audiences are, and then thinking about how you define them. So this is another place where I think we sometimes fall down, is that we say, well, our audiences are fundraisers and they're service users and they're campaigners and volunteers. And those are not audiences. Those are what audiences might do. Those are the journeys that you might take them on. And they might take a number of those journeys depending on their level of connection. So I think it's really important to define audiences in the first instance by their motivation and their connection. So what problem are they trying to solve when they come to you? People are not necessarily making a donation because they want to support your work. They might be making a donation because they have personal experience of the issue that you work on, and they want to support other people who may be having the same experiences. So it's thinking really about what that motivation is. And how are they connected to you? Have they got lived experience of the issue that you work on? Has someone within their community got that experience? Are they professionally connected to the issue that you work on? So it's thinking about those two vital areas to help you define your audiences. And once you have a sense of the motivations and connections for those audience groups, you can start to learn more about them and more about who they are and what they do for you. So you can take these suggested groups that you come up with based on motivation and connection as a kind of hypothesis to test and take out into the wild. So to start finding out about these audiences, you can do, I always recommend trying to do some quantitative research and some qualitative research. So starting off with a survey where you're asking specifically about motivation and connection to help you understand whether those motivations and connections are actually the ones that people are coming to you for. And then starting and also understanding how big those groups are, how many people have a particular motivation in all likelihood based on the sample size of your survey, and how many people have a particular connection to you, again based on that the size of the response. And then you can start to find out more about those people, find out about their demographics. Try to keep it simple, and think about what will really help you build a picture of them. There's best practice around surveys and demographics, but they are quite intense. If you use the entire best practice set of questions for a survey, you're asking an awful lot of questions of your audience. So try and think about what you really need to know, what will really help you build a picture of your audience within those questions. And then ask them which digital channels that they're using and how are they using them, how often are they on there, and what do they actually use them for? And ask them about your own digital channels. What do they like and not like about your digital channels? I've done this exercise with the Royal Marsden, and we had some really, really interesting responses, particularly in terms of understanding motivations, which is something I'll come back to again and again in this, in that what a primary motivation for people often connecting with charities and non-profits is community and wanting to find other people who've got similar experiences. So there's some really great insights that you can get from surveys. I think it works really well to try and offer an incentive where that's possible. It could be being entered into a prize draw to win an incentive rather than an incentive for every person that answers. But that can really help to sort of drive participation. But actually, a lot of the time you find that you've got really invested audiences who care deeply about you already, and they want to help you and they want to share this information. And then the other thing that I always advise doing and doing in projects with clients is insight interviews. Now, these feel like, if you've never done them before, they're going to take a long time and they're going to be really difficult to achieve. But actually, you only need to do 5 or 6 insight interviews with one audience group to really start to get into their motivations and start to understand their problems and barriers or pains and gains, and what their experience of going on a journey with you has been, so that you can learn from it. So you want to conduct at least 6 interviews. Well, it can be 5. We'll get away with 5, from people who are in one of your audience groups. So one of these groups that you have defined and then tested with the survey, and then you want to talk to them about a specific journey that they've already taken. So perhaps they've already made a donation, they've already taken part in an event, they've already volunteered for you, they already use one of your services, whatever it is. You want to ask people about an experience they've already had, because once you start asking people hypothetical questions, they will make things up because they don't know how they'll actually behave in a particular scenario. None of us do. So it's really important to ask people who've already taken that journey. Find out about their pains. What was the problem that they were having, or the problems they were having, that made them start the journey? Because you are solving something for them, even if it doesn't feel like you are. Whether it's feeling emotionally connected to an issue that they care about, whether it's feeling like they're starting to be part of a community, whether it's remembering someone, there will be lots of different motivations or problems that they're having that will make them start that journey. And you can ask a few questions around that. Find out about their experience. Where did they actually go on the journey? Where did they first hear about this offering that you have for them? Did they have any barriers? What did they think? Or I'm not sure if this is going to be actually addressing my problem because of X, Y, or Z. Finding out what those barriers are is really critical to be able to make the journey seem really smooth, because you can address those barriers as people progress through your digital journey to help them answer those questions that they might have had, and overcome them. And then you can ask whether they did overcome those barriers before they actually took up your offering. And then start to get into the offer itself, because your journey doesn't end, or their journey doesn't end once they sign on the dotted line, once they sign up or donate, or say that they're interested in being involved in a service. The journey continues throughout that service and beyond it. So what did they like about the experience of your offering? What didn't they like about it? And a question that I love to ask, because it really gives you a sort of holistic view of people's emotional takeaways and emotional experience of the journey, which often can be difficult for people to articulate in insight interviews because they're face to face with someone that they don't really know, as much as you can sort of try to make them feel as comfortable as you possibly can. But asking for 3 words that they would use to describe that journey will really give you a sense of the emotional journey that they've been through, as they have taken up your offering. And then once you have collated your survey findings and your insight interviews, you'll start to have a really deep understanding of the audience group or groups that you're trying to target. And I am still a big fan of old school user personas. So this is kind of roughly how I would lay out a basic user persona. I would try to come up with an image of a typical user, or a typical, whether it's donor, volunteer, service user, and I would note down their particular demographics, the ones that I felt were relevant, and I'd come up with a short bio for them. I'd list all of the digital channels that the client is present on, and whether or not this audience is using them. If there's obviously any information on how they're using them that feels particularly vital, that can be included there as well. And particularly then from your insight research, this is the real gold that you don't get from data and you don't get from surveys, really. You get from those personal conversations with people who've already been on these journeys for you. What did they think as they were going through this journey before it? What did they think after it? What did they feel? What did they actually say? What were the sort of verbatim quotes that you can pull out of those interviews? What did they actually say about the experience? And what did they actually do? Where did they travel on that journey? Once you've got these user personas, they can always be at the heart of the marketing content that you're creating, and also at the heart of mapping out your journeys, because obviously you want to be present on the channels that your audience are using, not just the ones that they're using, but the ones that they're using in the right way. So trying to sell them something that is not related to their work when they're really only using LinkedIn for work is not going to work. So it's thinking about how they're using those channels as well to help you with your mapping. Once you've got your user personas, you can think about a key message framework. And I think we sometimes skip this, but it's really essential, especially when you've got teams working on different bits of the digital journey. You're all coming at it with slightly different expertise and talents and creative strengths. So having this key message framework to really tie everything together, and make the content that you're creating across your channels feel similar, but also feel really connected to your audiences. So that's the key with getting a message framework right, is having primary and secondary messages that really address what you've uncovered in your market research. So I always, in the primary message, which might end up being a tagline if that's appropriate, depending on what you're creating, to try and address either a motivation or a barrier. Because if people see that their motivation is addressed and they're able to see that in your content very quickly and easily, or if a key barrier is addressed and they can see that quickly and easily, then they're more likely to take that next step on the journey. And then your secondary messages, and all of the sort of content that you're creating, can look at addressing pains, look at addressing gains, and also start to look at relatable content, so relatable experiences and relatable people. And that goes back to this issue of trust, which I really just don't stop talking about because I think it's so critical, particularly in the charity sector. You have to win trust, and it's so hard to win now because misinformation has led to a lot of distrust. So having those relatable experiences and relatable people in your content, or as part of your campaign and working with influencers and beyond, can really help to build that trust. And then it's also really thinking about your tone of voice. And working so hard for your copy to be simple, accessible, and also use familiar language. And I think that's a real game changer when it comes to messaging, is using the language that you hear from your audience. So in campaigns, I will sometimes literally lift a phrase that I have heard people say to me in insight interviews, especially if I've heard it a number of times, and use that in copy for marketing campaigns. And it does make a huge difference, because the audience feels like they are hearing from an organization that really understands and gets them. And if you understand and get someone, they feel like you really care about them and you care about their motivation, which of course you do. And then we can start to think about mapping out your journeys, which is complex, but it's worthwhile doing. So thinking about what are the entry points to your journey? How are users being prompted from one stage to the next? So remembering that they could enter and go in and out of that journey in that kind of spaghetti fashion at any point. All of your channels need to, of course, have that key messaging replicated across them, but also have prompts to take people from one stage to the next. So if they're just becoming aware of you, how can they find out more about engagement? What can they sign up to in terms of email marketing that will help them to learn more, but not necessarily sign up straight away? Is there a landing page that they can go to learn more information and start to have some of those pain points and barriers addressed? And it's also thinking about whether the data flow is smooth, because that's another point where things can jar. So if someone signs up for something and they don't immediately get back what they were expecting, because a manual process has to happen to get someone onto a database, and then to trigger another program to send them a follow-up email or get a call or whatever it is that they're expecting. As soon as you open up that gap, it feels jarring to the audience and they start to lose their motivation. So it's really thinking about, is there any jarring in terms of key messaging? Is there any jarring in terms of the data flow? Is there any jarring in terms of people being prompted to take the next stage in the journey? Are they being directed at every stage of the journey? And also remembering that there isn't necessarily an end to the journey. It does keep going. It's not linear, and that consideration phase can take a long time. And I think, as I mentioned already, kind of the AI summary in search, and it's thinking about, even if someone doesn't necessarily visit a channel, like a ratings site, for example, there's evidence to show that ratings sites are being used as a source to provide information in that AI summary and search. So even if you're not actively creating content for that digital channel, it may still be influencing your audience's decision making. So it's really thinking holistically about that map and where people could be influenced in terms of their journey with you. Once you've mapped out that journey, you can look at the data. Data is really helpful, and I'm a real advocate of benchmarking and thinking about where you can actually count and measure if there are changes in your digital journey based on all of this work that you've done in terms of really getting to understand your audience and really smoothing out that journey. So where can you actually count what would be the before, what would be the benchmark for this journey, and then where can you look for changes and where can you look for drop-offs, because actually we should still see that funnel effect a little bit. So there are channels where people are more likely to find out about you, whether that's search or social media, for example. And we should start to see that narrowing down of people eventually getting to that sign up stage or that commitment stage. And you can look for drop-offs. So especially if you've got something set up like an email journey to help people through this digital journey, you can actually see where they're dropping off on the email journey, and start to get into why that could be happening? So, what data do you have about these drop-off points where you can see that you're losing people? And is that a reason to kind of go back to sort of the insight stage and start to uncover with people why potentially there's drop-offs at that point? And of course, we have to be thinking in our journeys about accessibility. I have been lucky to do some work with MenCap in the past on their email marketing, and they were very clear to say that accessibility is not a one size fits all. So I just want to be really kind of clear on that. But we should be thinking about what specific accessibility needs your audience has. And that could be, again, something that you're asking in your survey and your insight stage. And also thinking about what specific accessibility needs are there for the channels in this particular journey, and thinking then about how can you improve accessibility. But there are some sort of standard things I would look for anyway, plus these specific needs for the specific audience and the specific channels that you're working with. So things like alt text for images, instructions, having a logical structure, underlining links, having sort of color contrast links, color contrast text, using headers, having meaningful link text, having plain text versions of email, for example, accessible fonts, using title case, and particularly using really clear language would be some of the things that I'd be looking at. Now, we've probably come to this point and you're thinking, sorry, do you know that my entire day is taken up with Zoom meetings and my workload is actually the workload of 5 people? And the answer is yes, I do. And I know that this is a lot of work, but it is worth it. I also know that at any point in the sort of process that we've just discussed, you can get stuck. And I've been there. I've been in those meetings where someone says, well, our audiences are complicated. And then you spend 2 hours talking about how complicated your audiences are. I think it's a really valuable skill to be able to identify problems, but it is so much more valuable to be able to solve them. So I'm gonna just put this up as a huge Barack Obama fan to say, don't be that guy, and please encourage other people not to be that guy. As Barack says, I've seen every level, people who are very good at describing problems and very sophisticated in explaining why something went wrong or why something can't get fixed. But what I'm always looking for is, no matter how small the problem or how big it is, somebody who says, let me take care of that. So the answer to all of those process issues that could come up and could be a 2-hour, 5-hour, 6-week conversation, yes, you could do that, but you could also say, let's try it, let's test it, let's just see how it goes, let's get a minimal viable product and get it out there. Let's get a journey that we think is going to work, key messaging that we think is going to work based on the evidence that we've collected from the audience, who are the people who are the real judges here, and let's test it. And the other thing I really wanted to say is, I know a lot of you will be creatives, and that's why you work in communications or marketing or fundraising. And I also want to say, part of creating compelling digital journeys is protecting the magic. So if you are tasked with creating content, with being creative, that doesn't happen when you're sitting in a Zoom meeting. It doesn't happen when you're sitting at your desk. Those ideas don't come to you when you are writing a 5-page paper on the campaign that you're creating. They happen when you pause. They happen when you have a shower. I'm sure you've been in that situation before, and suddenly you have a shower, you've stepped away from everything you've been thinking about, and all of the answers come into your head. So treat yourself like the creative that you are and give yourself the time to create these incredible pieces of content about the amazing work that you're doing. Get back to your own connection and your own motivation. Why do you do this? Why do you work in this sector where I get paid a bit less and, the benefits aren't necessarily the same as the commercial sector? You probably do it because you really care. So connect back with that. Get out in nature. Go for a walk or a run or wheel about the place. Talk it over if that's how your mind works. If you are someone who just grows ideas through connection with other people, get together with your favorite other creative people and talk it through. Or be completely still and silent if that's how your brain works. And that's when you have your most creative moments, when you're alone and you have no other sensory input. Make a vision board. If you are a visual person, just treat yourself to being creative, treat yourself to those creative moments. And it may feel like it is taking you more time that you don't have, but the impact is exponential. And do spend time on the channels you're creating for. I do have the guilt of, like, I spend a lot of time doing social media management and email marketing, and I also spend a lot of time on those channels. And I try to not have the guilt about just scrolling or just reading stuff that other people have created, because actually that's also inspiring. And I always try to remind myself in those moments of, like, oh, I don't know how to address this campaign and create something for it, to hardwire my heart to my keyboard, because the most amazing connecting content doesn't come from here, it comes from here. So just treat yourself like the creative that you are. And then I'm going to say some more controversial things. Ban approvals. No, don't completely ban them, but ban just blanket approvals, because I've seen that happen a lot as well. And I know that it's spoken about a lot, particularly in comms, of this approvals process, that you have these amazing creative ideas and then they get whittled down to nothing in the approvals process. And I think it's all about setting parameters according to expertise. Approvals are important, but it's important to have be approving based on expertise. So if you've got senior level approvals that your campaign or evergreen content might need to go through, the questions that they should be asking or answering in the approvals process is this in line with our strategic priorities? And particularly at your team's level, if you're in comms, if you're in fundraising, you have a strategy, right? Hopefully. If not, that's another question for another time. But if what you're creating is in line with that strategy and those strategic priorities, that should get their thumbs up. Is what you've created and this campaign, this digital journey, in line with your organization's values? If it is, it should get signed off at senior level. There shouldn't be any other questions being answered at that level. And then you go to brand level. You will have someone who is in charge of your brand, and they are the brand police, and what they say goes. But they must be approving based on the brand guidelines that have been signed off organizationally. You will have an editorial expert, or someone who is just your spelling and grammar whiz in-house that always does the copy checking, and that is their area of expertise. So they should be approving in that area only. And then you'll have fact checking, and you will have experts within your organization or who are connected to your organization that may or may not, depending on the campaign and content, need to fact check what it is that you're putting out there, because that is another way that as charities we really build trust, is by being experts and relying on that expertise, which helps to build that trust with our audience. But you want to get to this minimum viable product. We're never going to create something that is perfect, but what we have to be able to do is create something and test it with the people it's for. And the people it's for are our audiences. Even if we've got people internally who have strong lived experience of the issue that we work on, and they would be the target audience for the journey that we're creating, they're still not the actual audience, they're still staff. So it needs to get out there in the wild, and some of it might fail, some of it probably will fail, and that is a good thing because we can learn from it and we can refine based on the results, and we can go back to this is when we can go back to data and we can look at our comparative data points and say, oh well, this is doing better than it did this time last year, or this is doing better than our expected benchmark for this stage of the journey. Or we can say it's doing a lot worse and we need to find out why, and then start to think, how can we find out why? Is it possible to go back to any people that are dropping off at this point and find out why they dropped off? And you can think about, what specifically might need to change. So that's a lot from me, and we've got 20 minutes left. So I'd love to start taking some questions. But before we do that, can I ask you to look back at your original motivation for being here, just for as you are the audience. And if you put that down as a question, please just think to yourself for a moment, has that question been answered? Because I would really love to answer that question for you. And if it hasn't been answered, please pop it in the Q&A. And then hopefully James and I can go through those questions and we'll get them all answered by the end of the session. But thank you so much for listening and for being here.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Really interesting presentation and some really lovely comments already in the chat. We've also received, well, 14 questions so far. So please keep upvoting your favorite questions. We'll start with the most popular ones first and work our way down. We've got 20 minutes, so we'll hopefully be able to cover them all. But yeah, do make sure that you're voting those up. So yeah, thank you again, Helen, for that presentation. Our first question is from Teresa. So what if audience motivations and connections overlap, e.g. beneficiary of service may also want to help with a campaign?
Definitely. I think that's a really critical question, and it goes back to that point that fundraisers are not an audience, service users are not an audience, campaigners are not an audience. Their motivation is not that thing. That is the journey that they go on. Their motivation might be, I have experienced this issue personally, and that's why I want to get involved with the organization, or I want to get involved with the organization because I want to connect with other people who've done the same thing, or I want to prevent other people from experiencing the same issue. And what they actually do to do that could be volunteering. It could be making a donation. So this is the trap that we get caught in because of silo working, which is something that happens easily and understandably, and we build connections within our own teams, and we're thinking constantly about our own team's motivations and strategies, but we need to go back to people's core connection with the organization and people's core motivation for that particular offering that you're working on. So there could be a number of different connections and motivations that make people make a donation, for example. And so you want to divide those audiences up into the different connections and the different motivations. And it might be that you do it by connection. So you say it's people with lived experience of this issue, and their motivations are to XYZ, whatever comes up in your insight research. And you start to kind of group people on that basis. And what you'll start to see then is, oh, well, actually, parents of children who've had this issue have slightly different motivations and slightly different, it's a slightly different connection, and they have slightly different reasons for doing this, and their barriers and are slightly different. So actually they need different information along the journey to encourage them to complete it. So it's really, basing your audiences on motivation and connection, and then growing them out from there, learning about them from that start point.
Yeah, understand your audience and try and, that's pretty good advice. Next question. So is there any software or template that can help with mapping user journeys?
Oh, great question. So I really like to use Miro for that. It's if you haven't come across it, it's an online whiteboarding service. You get, I think it's 3 whiteboards for free, and you can use the flowchart symbols to map digital journeys. So I do this with clients when I'm working on kind of particular journeys, and it's a really great way to you get the map down, and when you come together to talk about it, you realize what's missing, and it's a really great, I think, particularly for me, because I'm very sort of visually oriented, it really helps me to see where there could be potential drop-offs, and I can check those journey points and see whether people are being prompted to move on. I can see if there's jarring in the messaging or in the sort of in another aspect of the creative, and really help to kind of smooth out that journey. It's a great kind of a great start point, I find. But if you're not so visually oriented and you think in a different way, there may be other tools that could be more helpful to you. It's not necessarily a one size fits all. It's thinking about what would really help you if you are imagining a journey. I also used to do it when I used to run events. I would imagine someone's physical journey coming into an event to remind me that if it was an event in the winter, for example, there would need to be a coat rack near the door if there wasn't a coat service already. So just actually imagining you are that person walking in, and their journey, where have they come from, how did they arrive, what information that might they need about drop off, actually just doing it in your mind can
Yeah.
really help as well.
Yeah. Someone said, was that mural? Someone said in
Mural's another one which I do also
right.
use,
What was it called?
but I
Mural.
use Miro, Miro.
Right. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah,
I think I've used Mural for sort of like idea generation, everyone
yeah,
inputting it together, but never for the user journey. So
yeah,
that's really useful tip.
yeah.
Next question is from Orla. So we are a small organization with very small staff capacity for this, unfortunately. In terms of social media, is it better to use one or two or be on all of them? I have my opinion, a colleague disagrees. We'd be interested to see what you think.
So I think it comes back to audiences and audience first thinking. Um, who are you trying to reach as an organization? Which digital channels, which social media platforms are they using? And how often are they on them, and how are they using them? I think if you can speak to your existing social media audiences, you will get a good sense of that. I have done a user persona project. So that was part of the Royal Marsden work that I was talking about, user persona project on just their sort of social media channels. And we got some really that some of those questions were coming up as well. And we got some really interesting results just in terms of people's connection from different platforms, and how they kind of responded to things, what their sort of perception was of the organization and where they expected to find them. It's really worthwhile spending time doing that audience research, so that the answer comes from your audience, not from and I've been in these conversations, that the two of you sitting in on Zoom or on Teams or whatever, and sort of talking it out and not necessarily reaching a conclusion. I think definitely take the time to ask your audience, and I think it feels like it's extra time, but it does really pay off. I want to give an example before, actually, in the presentation, that one of the campaigns I worked on fairly recently that you may have seen yourselves was the Swift Aid Great Gift Aid Hunt, and the difference between doing that audience research and journey mapping from one year to the next was an increase of 170% in people participating. So it does take time and commitment, and sometimes there are internal barriers that are really challenging to get through, and I get that, but it will pay dividends for you in the end. And also I would always say, with any kind of strategic changes or sort of projects like this, it doesn't have to happen all at once. If you've got really limited capacity, just go for one thing. Like let's just think about how people are finding us. If that's your start point, that in relation to this question, social media is often one of that sort of attention top of the funnel or top of the spaghetti pile places. So let's just focus on that and make sure that we are really on the platform where people are most likely to find us, and where they're most likely to be in the space where they're ready to connect with us.
Yeah. And one thing I was going to mention as well, in terms of, charities with social media, it is, difficult with capacity. One thing that we use is Hootsuite. So
Oh yeah.
you can sort of put all of your social media channels, log in, and then you can do one post and send it out to, 3 or 4 different channels. So if you've got content that you'd like to schedule, you can sort of do that in advance. So that's quite useful in terms of, yeah, scheduling it and not having to think, oh, I need to go and post that now. You can kind of interact with people in the comments afterwards and use your time wisely there, but then schedule things in advance in terms of, yeah, capacity.
Definitely, definitely. And also, like I'm a big fan of evergreen content banks. Um,
Mm,
so, these sort of evergreen topics that your audience might always want to talk about or get information about or can relate to, creating a bank of that content, that's sort of quite significant. I'm talking like, 20, 30, 40 posts, which again is a project, but then setting that to repeat regularly, which you
mm,
can do through schedulers like Smarter Queue. And that means that actually your demand for staff time in terms of creating new content is not there all the time. So I recently worked on a project for a community publisher called Queen Spark Books, where we sort of set that up for them. And yeah, they found it really helpful in terms of that reduced staff time, and focus on social media so that they only need to post about anything new, and they've got capacity then to use that creative energy for other projects.
definitely. Yeah, and just like listening to what people are requesting, and that can then inform what content you produce or what your website looks like, just always listening to the audience.
Definitely.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Helen. The next one is from Bethany. So a lot of this feels targeted towards people who are already engaged. How do we reach out to those who might not have any awareness or incorrect belief about the charity who don't currently visit our channels?
So I think that's the thing that sometimes we, I think, expend energy on where we don't need to, because what you will find if you are doing research with your existing audience, and if you think about those groups, so for example, I gave the example of parents of children who've experienced the issue that you work on.
Mm,
Um, it's quite likely that you haven't, I would say 100% likely that you haven't reached every parent who has a child who's experienced the issue that you work on. So actually, if you can learn from the existing group who are already connected with you, you're likely to reach these sort of lookalike audiences. And you probably know, if you do social media advertising, that one of the ways that that can work quite effectively is quite literally targeting, asking the platforms to target lookalike audiences, so audiences that are very similar to the ones that you already have. And that is a really effective, low time and effort method for growing your audiences. If you start to target an entirely new audience group that you're not connected with already, with an entirely new offering, that is going to take a lot more time, research, cost, and I would argue that in a resource poor environment, it's not the best strategy.
definitely. Great, thank you. Lucy asks, could you give us any examples of user journeys you have seen that have been done really well in the sector?
Oh,
It's a
that's a good
thinker,
one.
I think.
That's a good one.
Yeah,
Um, Nothing's occurring to me off the top of my head,
we
but
can always revisit.
let me take that away. And if something occurs to me, because I'm thinking of lots of organizations that are coming up in my head that are really effective on particular channels, but let me think about a journey that you could have a look at, and
Yeah,
I
quite
will
hard to
make
demonstrate
sure
in
that that comes.
conversation.
Yeah, I'll make sure that comes out in the emails that I
Yes.
think are going out to you later this week. So I think
Yeah.
you get one this afternoon, is that right? And then one
Yeah.
later this week.
One this afternoon
Yeah,
and then later on in the week with the recording and any resources. So yeah, Helen and I will stay in touch and we'll send that out if anything comes
it's a
to mind.
great question though.
Very good question. Next question is from Deborah. So what channels do you suggest using to do digital surveys in order to reach new supporters and audiences? I stuttered a bit, so let me know if you need to hear that again.
No, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
I caught all that. So, I mean, there are lots of survey tools that you can use, like SurveyMonkey or Typeform is great. Or I think if you're an Office user, which I know many organizations are, I think is it MS Forms it's called in
Yes, yeah,
Office. Yeah, I'm a Google, so there's also Google Forms. I'm a Google user. So yeah, there's any tool like that would work really effectively. And again, if you're doing market research, you're trying to reach your existing audiences and learn from them to reach audiences that are like them, because you reaching audiences that you don't know already, they're not going to be able to tell you about how to improve your journey because they haven't taken that journey. But learning from the audiences that have taken that journey will help you reach similar audiences and help you really grow quickly and effectively.
yeah, perfect. Yeah, we used to use Typeform and I did love it, really visual.
Yeah,
We've recently moved to Microsoft. It's incorporated
yeah,
into most people's subscriptions and it gives you really nice visual results as well. You can get like word
exactly.
maps, you can get graphs. So it's really nice for you to process your information.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm working on a project at the moment with World Cancer Research Fund, and we did a survey, and I believe they used MS Forms for it. I
Yeah.
got lots of wonderful charts as a result, which I was thrilled with.
Yeah, does the work for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Now on to, I've got 5 minutes left. So on to Laura. So regarding incentives for surveys, we
Yeah.
ran a focus group with a £30 draw incentive recently and received a bunch of spam/bot responses. The pound really seemed to attract them. Do you have any advice?
So I find I know focus groups are a thing, and they can be really effective. I have not, I have struggled to get them to be effective, um, unless the group know each other already.
Right.
So I find insight interviews that are one-to-one, people are more likely to sign up for than they are for a focus group because of that fear of going into a digital room where you don't know anyone, and you don't know what it's going to be like.
Mm.
So I would veer away from focus groups, and I would focus on like doing the survey, and then seeing if you can get insight interviews, and particularly with the people who can give you the best information are, you would probably know this as well in terms of like marketing theory, but eventually as people become repeat customers or repeat volunteers or donors or whatever it is, they rise up this ladder and they eventually become advocates, and they are the
Yes.
people who are out there, and they're talking about how amazing you are, and that word of mouth is actually your biggest seller. That is the biggest thing that is going to persuade people to get involved with you because they trust this person. They're telling people they know, and people who have had similar experiences to them that they've really connected with. So talking to those people, those advocates who, and they do everything for you as well. When you really get into the research, they fundraise, they use your services, they speak on behalf of you, they'll go out and sort of do events. They're incredible, and you know who they are. If you work in an organization, in a charity, you probably know them by name. Speak to them, because don't you want thousands of them? That would be amazing. So I think, yeah, definitely connecting with those people face to face and finding out about their experiences of your digital journeys will really give you fantastic insight. So, and they would probably be motivated to do it without any incentive. So it is possible to find people to speak to one-to-one, and because it is so disappointing when you organise a focus group. I've been there and like people don't turn up, or like one or two people turn up, and it's just, yeah, and you're just not getting what you need out of it, and neither are they.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely say go one-to-one.
Yeah. Sounds good. And then, yeah, those people who are your advocates, they can
Mm,
say, oh, yeah, initially I struggled with this, but because I wanted it, I found my way and did this, but you should improve ABC. And they're confident
definitely.
in telling you because they know you so well.
Definitely.
That's great. From Aaron, so how to balance personalization versus being inclusive of all our community?
Yeah, so that, I think this is a really important question. And actually, I didn't say, I did have in my notes, but I forgot to say, when you are creating user personas, and it's actually Microsoft who came up with this concept of spectrum personas. So when you look at user personas, you look at you look at the most likely characteristics for that group. And what you might do in looking at most likely is exclude groups who are sort of minorities in some way. So for Microsoft particularly, they were looking at people with disabilities. So something like 15 to 20% of people globally have disabilities and are more likely to have some challenges or barriers to accessing IT services. So they look at this spectrum persona approach, where they look specifically at this kind of user persona that they've developed, and then they develop a spectrum for it. So they'll say, well, it's this person but with visual impairment, it's this person but with, you know, whatever it is that in terms of their disability that might prevent them accessing Microsoft services. So I think I really like that approach, and I do try to use that approach where it feels sort of really, really relevant for the particular organization that I'm working with. So that would be and I'll get the link. They've got a nice guide to spectrum personas on the Microsoft site, one of the Microsoft sites. So I'll try and find that to go in the link that goes out to you all later this week.
That'd be brilliant. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, that is all we've got time for today. So thank you, Helen. So many useful takeaways there. We've had some really great comments in the chat. People have found this session really useful. So thank you very much. And if you could share your feedback, that'd be fantastic. So we're popping a link in the chat. You'll also receive a prompt afterwards, the email that will go out this afternoon, and you'll receive the recording and any resources that Helen has discussed in the coming days. On a related note, closely related to digital journeys, we've got our digital fundraising summit coming up in November. So the details of that will be in the chat stream. That is a free online summit. So we're really looking forward to that. Should be a really great day. And thank you once again to Helen and to everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much. It was really great to hang out with you all.
Thank you, everyone.